Good morning in America, good afternoon in Europe, and good evening in Asia. Today we have a pretty important announcement from Blizzard, kind of out of the blue, but we have to go over it. I've seen this kind of getting glossed over and skipped by the community, but it is actually a massive change, in particular in Mythic Plus, and as well in PvP, but who cares about that? So, the major change for today we have to go over is that Blizzard, out of nowhere, came out with this announcement. Blizzard is increasing the player's stamina by 40% and the creature damage by 40% in Dragonflight. So roughly every player will have 40% more health and all the enemies will be doing 40% more damage. There are tiny few, of course, changes, like for example tanks that can benefit more from stamina having a little bit more health than 40%, like Guardian Druids or Blood Death Knights for example, but on average, okay, to keep it even, you all have 40% more health and you all take 40% more damage. This has to do, of course, with a lot of the scaling, a lot of the borrowed powers we were gaining throughout an expansion, making us stronger and stronger, getting more and more power by the end of Shadowlands, making a lot of the damage we were taking quite trivial. Now, we're not gonna get that in Dragonflight. There's not gonna be, at the very least, clearly, a borrowed power which will make us progressively get stronger and stronger at whatnot. So, this change, at a very simple first take, you might gloss over this change, you might ignore it by saying, yeah, okay, what's the difference? I have more health, so I have more room to take damage, it's the same as before, nothing changes. Actually, this is massive, it changes a lot, in particular for healers and in particular for tanks. Sure, this is mostly the same for DPS players, doesn't change too much. What it changes though is a lot for healers and tanks. So in raids, what does this change for healers? For healers, this changes a lot in terms of the mana you're spending and in terms of abilities or certain ways healers heal that might become more useful, might become better with this change. The mana, of course, is a big change because let's go back to what the announcement says. The players have 40% more health and the enemies do 40% more damage, okay? There is a problem. The healing stays the same. So you still heal as if the players had 100,000 HP, except now the players have 140,000 HP, which means you're going to be having much more to heal. Because if the player with 100,000 HP loses half his health, he will be missing 50,000 health. If the player with 40% more HP, so now he has 140,000, if he loses half his health, now he has 70,000 left to heal. However, your healing doesn't get stronger. However, you want to be healing for more, which means with this change, healers will have to spend more time using healing abilities. They will have to spend less time doing damage, for example, to cast more, to heal more. So not only does this change the amount of time you have, of course, to cast damaging abilities, it also changes the amount of mana you're going to be spending, because you have to spend more mana to achieve the same results now, because everyone has 40% more health, but you're still healing for the same amount. So that's one of the possibly big changes in the raid. The second change I mentioned is the one about the way the specs heal. This might be good for some of the specs, namely specs like Holy Priest and specs like Restoration Druid that have a lot of overhealing, a lot of HOTS left on the ground or left on the players, which keep rolling even if the target is at full HP. This one, increasing the player's HP by 40% and the damage they take by 40%, might make the health missing float a little bit more than now. Because even compared to before, if you might be thinking, well, but if the enemies are doing 40% more damage together with the 40% more health, it's gonna be the same. As we said, healers don't gain more healing power. They are still healing the same amount, which means, as I said, a shaman, for example, now might need to cast 2 Riptides to get the same result in terms of health increase to the target that they are currently casting. A Holy Paladin might have to cast 2 abilities instead of 1. Same goes for a Holy Priest with heal or flash heal, having to cast it for more, for longer. So the healing style, so to speak, that is effective in the raid might change, together with the mana you're spending in the raid might change. Of course, as we said, the main change for healers in Mythic Plus is going to be likely the amount of time you have available to actually damage to actually do DPS. This might be good news for the specs that are not currently doing tons of damage in Mythic Plus, because it means it won't nearly be as good or as valuable, because you won't have the time, as much time, to spend doing damage as you currently are in Shadowlands, perhaps. It depends, we still have to see just how hard this will impact healers in Mythic Plus. But it's definitely a pretty big change in the way the healing will work in Dragonflight. Then you have the change to tanks, which is even bigger, because tanks have quite a few abilities that can heal them based on their HP. Either based on their full HP, based on their current HP, based on their max HP. So obviously getting your health increased by 40% is going to benefit the tanks that have those type of abilities. For example, let's just start with one of the better ones, which is Blood Death Knight, because roughly 60% of all of the healing of a Blood Death Knight is going to come from Death Strike and the shield generated by Death Strike, Blood Shield. This is good because Death Strike healing comes from the amount of damage you have taken recently, which means with the enemies doing 40% more damage, Death Strike will be 40% stronger. The other one is Blood Shield, because Blood Shield is generated based on the amount of health you healed with Death Strike, based on a percentage of your health. And now you have 40% more health, which means Blood Shield will be stronger. So Death Knight can benefit quite a lot from this change. A spec that is not going to benefit a lot from this change is Brewmaster, because out of all of this healing, discount the OP trinket at the top. In all of this healing, the only one that is based and is functioning with this change is Gaiplane's Imperial Brew, because this talent is going to heal you immediately from a portion of the staggered damage of Purifying Brew. And of course, because staggered damage is based on the damage you're taking, the enemy is doing 40% more damage, will give you a bigger stagger, so when you purify it, you're going to heal for more. That is basically the only benefit of Brewmaster. This is only 15-ish% of all of the healing of Brewmaster, compared to the 60% of the healing of Blood Death Knight with Death Strike, so it's much weaker for Brewmaster. A spec who is somewhat in the middle, around the 25-ish to 30% of your healing scaling with this change, is Guardian Druid, because Earth Warden and Frenzied Regen are benefiting from this change. Frenzied Regen heals you based on your health. So getting 40% more health will make Frenzied Regen 40% more effective, and Earth Warden is going to reduce the damage you're taking. So the enemy is doing 40% more damage, are going to make Earth Warden stronger. However, your two stronger heals coming from Dragonflight talents right now, like Elune's Favored and Bloody Healing, both come from your damage, both come from attack power scaling, and you don't do more damage, you don't get a damage buff. So these two type of heals are not increasing. Moving over to specs that are completely out of luck are Protection Paladin and Protection Warrior, because their heals are all based on attack power. They are all based on the damage they are doing or the stats they have. Like Protection Paladin has Word of Glory, which is a single target heal based on your attack power, and Bulwark of Order, which is a shield for a portion of the damage of your Avenger's shield, which is also based on attack power. So it is not in any way affected by your max HP increase or your more damage taken from the enemies. Same goes for Prot Warrior, whose biggest and strongest source of healing is Ignore Pain. Ignore Pain is again scaling with your attack power, not with your health and not with the damage you're taking. So these two specs are the worst. With players having 40% more health but taking 40% more damage, Prot Warrior and Prot Paladin are the tanks which benefit the least from these changes. Finishing the list with the other tank which benefits the most, together with Blood Death Knight, that is Vengeance, because similar to Blood, 60-ish% of their healing done will be scaling with this change. Consume Souls and Soulmonger are both scaling with the change. Because Consume Soul of Vengeance works similar to Death Strike, it works based on the damage you have taken in the last 5 seconds. And Soulmonger works by giving you a shield based on 10% of your max HP. So of course, getting 40% more health will be making Soulmonger 40% stronger. So Of the tanks, you have Blood and Vengeance being the strongest ones when it comes to benefiting from this change. You have Guardian Druid being somewhat in the middle, Brewmaster being quite low with just 15-ish% of their healing benefiting from this change, and then you have Prot Warrior and Prot Paladin basically getting no increases from this change. There is, however, a small caveat, because tanks aren't just tanky because they heal. Tanks are tanky because they block, because they parry, because they dodge, because they have damage reduction. So healing is not just the only thing that makes them tanky. And some of the things they can do to take less damage are stronger than others in this change. Parry makes you take 0 damage if you parry, and so does dodge. Meanwhile, block only reduces the damage you're taking from that attack by 30%. So if we increase the damage we are taking by 40%, parry and dodge can still ignore that damage completely. It doesn't matter if it's increased by 40% or by 4,000,000%, you're still taking 0 damage if you successfully parry. Meanwhile, block is still reducing the damage you're taking by 30%. So if before you were getting hit by 100, you block, you get hit by 70. Now you get hit by 140, you block, you get hit by 98. So with this change, it becomes much better to have ways to not take damage, like dodge and like parry, than ways to mitigate damage, like absorb shields, like Protection Paladins absorb shields, or Brewmaster Monks absorb shields, or Prot Warriors absorb shields, or ways to block, because it's just reducing a portion of your damage. A very simple visual example of this is one of the tanks which is benefiting the most from this change, Blood Death Knight, is also benefiting the most from this change because they are the spec which can parry the most. And because parry makes you take 0 damage, that's the result. The result is that it doesn't matter if the enemy is doing 40% more damage if you parry and take 0. That is very beneficial for Blood Death Knight. Compare this to far less lucky specs like Guardian Druid. Guardian Druid can't parry, Guardian Druid can't block, Guardian Druid can only dodge, and they don't even dodge that often. Guardian Druid usually absorbs or mitigates a lot of the damage because they have a lot of armor, because they have Iron Fur, because they have Ursoc's Fury that creates absorb shields, but none of this helps too much to mitigate this 40% more damage of the enemies as much as the parry of a Blood Death Knight, for example. The only exception, the only slight exception with block being possibly still good is Prot Warrior, because Prot Warrior of course has the mastery that can increase your chance to block, plus it gives you crits, so you can block for 60% less damage instead of 30% less damage, and you do still have the best blocking ability in the game, which is shield block. So as you can see here from the B number, you end up blocking quite a big amount as a Prot Warrior compared to a Prot Paladin, for example, which blocks for far less than a Prot Warrior. But it is still not as good as specs that can completely ignore the damage with dodging or with parrying. The overall point out of all of this is that this 40% max HP increase to all players and the 40% more damage to all enemies can have quite a lot of impact, in particular where this matters more, which is Mythic Plus, because this is going to touch pretty much all of the specs and all of the roles because of the amount of damage the tanks can take. In particular, of course, will make them more susceptible to becoming meta or not based on how they deal. When it comes to raid encounters, it's definitely not going to be nearly as important for a tank. It's going to be much more important for healers. It's going to be more important for healers in the way they heal, in the way they deal with these much increased and bigger health pool of the players without actually having stronger heals to compensate. So you are still healing as if everyone had 100,000 HP, but now everyone has 40% more, so it might affect specs differently. Plus, then you have the possible problem of the mana. Because you're making healers take more time to heal the same amount they were healing before, because everyone has more HP and all of the enemies are doing more damage, but your healing isn't stronger, it might also change, for example, the mana you're spending, because you have to spend more to heal the same amount. So that it might also impact a lot the way The way, perhaps even the way you manage your mana, the way maybe even specs are viable based on their mana they can spend in the raid, not to mention the way you can heal. Healers perhaps with more hots, with more heals over time and with more throughput can deal with this much larger health pool of the raid better than others. Perhaps raid cooldowns become stronger again. You know, cooldowns like barrier, reducing damage taken, cooldowns like spirit links, cooldowns like aura mastery, because the enemies do 40% more damage and these huge cooldowns reduce the damage taken, they become once again much more powerful than cooldowns like Tranquility, for example, cooldowns like Divine Hymn, like Revival, because your healing isn't getting stronger. So these cooldowns are as strong as when the players had 40% less health. Now that the players have 40% more health, cooldowns like Barrier, reducing all the damage you take by 25%, when this change is going to give the enemies 40% more damage, is going to make it much more valuable once more in the raid. So there is definitely going to be room for lots of possible shifts and changes in the meta based on these changes from Blizzard. Of course, I am expecting some further tuning, because you can't just change this much tanks and healers without actually, tweaking and changing some of the healers that are hit the worst with this change and some of the tanks that are hit the worst out of this change. So I'm assuming some tuning and some tweaking and balancing will happen in the near future because of this change. But for now, I guess there's nothing else other than waiting and seeing what exactly this will do to the balance of these two roles in particular for both Mythic Plus and the raid. Now, on this Friday, on this beginning of the weekend, it's time to leave you once again. I am, of course, starting by thanking all of my Patreon supporters for supporting me and for contributing to the growth of this channel. That is still very much appreciated. You can still support in other ways which don't include having to go to molest your wallet, like liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. You can then, for more social interactions and general parasocial relationships, follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribe to my Patreon, which will also give you access to my Discord server right around here at these two links. With this said and done, it's time to leave. I have to go out, take my morning stroll around the corner to the bakery to get some pizza, I guess, today. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, talking about morning stroll, finally, November has come. It's 13 degrees at 11-ish a.m. So it's a pretty good start to the month, as opposed to the very, very disappointing October.